let's talk about Thri-Kreen of Athas by Tim Beach and Dori Hein, which is a source book for the Dark Sun setting for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It consists of a book and a poster with not loads on it. It's got pictures of different kinds of Thri-Kreen. I put that the wrong way around. That's a blank piece of white paper. And some extra text about subspecies. More decorative than anything, though it's not. It's kind of okay. This is a book about playing Thri-Kreen in Athas. It is sort of not a sequel, but a follow-on in a sub-series that didn't exist, but of races and species within, as in player character races within Dark Sun. There'll be one on the Elves of Athas, and there would be one on a particular group of halflings. This is about the Thri-Kreen, so it's about really the distinctive, along with half giants, the distinctive player. I mean, and mules, I guess, but Thri-Kreen feel like, despite the fact they're not original to Dark Sun, they feel like maybe of all of those the most classically Dark Sun, the one that maybe you associate visually most often with Dark Sun. But yes, it's one of three source books about races, and it is Tim Beach and Dori Hein didn't write too much. Dori Hein, I think, did some editing at other points. The cartography is by Diesel, interior art by John Dollar, cover art by Ned Dameron. Dameron is as usual kind of okay. John Dollar is actually decent. I tend to like John Dollar. It should remind you of a few other TSR authors of the same period. Certainly some texture like Tony DiTellizzi. But yeah, it's quite different from Steve Baxter and Brom, the other two big Dark Sun artists. So take that or leave that. But I quite like John Dollar. I think I like the texture and stuff. It's a big book. It's 128 pages. Tim Beach is the source book designer, and The Adventures by Dori Jean Hein. Neither, as I say, wrote loads. You have a chapter on psychological nature, one on physical nature, one on combat and special abilities, one on Thri-Kreen society, one on Pack and Nation, one on Thri-Kreen PCs, an appendix of new monsters, and a chapter 8, The Taste of Fear and Adventure, which is a 30-page adventure. This is a late-ish Dark Sun product. It is complicated in terms of the publication schedules, particularly around TSR going bust. Basically, this comes out after the Prism Pentad metaplot has ended. The big thing that had gone from, I guess, 91 through to late 94, early 95 has ended. And the rebirth of Athas has begun. Tithian has become part of the Cerulean Storm, or whatever that thing is. And now new challenges need to happen. Four Sorcerer Kings, but 3 new Sorcerer Kings are dead, and there are some Sorcerer Kings remaining. I think both the Dragon and Rajat has certainly been defeated, but I think the Dragon Boars has been defeated. Boris, you've got a very different metaplot setup, for good or for bad. I think, generally speaking, I don't think that those big metaplots of the 90s have aged well at all. You might prefer this setting for Dark Sun. I think the earlier setting is generally accepted to be a somewhat purer and more engaging one. It's certainly, in terms of the darkness of the setting, it hits better. But they are looking at this point to begin to go beyond the initial setting, beyond the tablelands around Tyr, the Tyr region. And so what you'll have after this, the next book, is Beyond the Prism Pentad, what happens next metaplot-wise. Then you have the revised box set, which this refers to and is significant, but which expands the world beyond Tyr. And then the remaining products after that, which use a controversial different livery. You can see the Dark Sun image is very different. I actually don't mind it. I like it. But yeah, you have the remaining books are some splat books, a splat book, Diviners and Preservers, a race book, Wind Riders of the Jagged Cliffs, Sonic Artifacts of Athas, which I just showed you, and the Wanderers Chronicles, Mine Lords of the Last Sea. So you have a bunch of stuff that goes to the edge of the Tablelands, or north of the Tablelands, or in the campaign setting itself. The revised one also gives you information about the great stuff beyond the whole kind of region with this big set of cliffs, the Jagged Cliffs. Shows you beyond that the Crimson Savannah of the Kreen. And this introduces those concepts. It refers to, it says, oh yes, we mentioned a new type of Thri-Kreen in this book, in fact in the first Monstrous Compendium book, and this introduces others. This is now expanding beyond the Thri-Kreen to the Thri-Kreen as well, and the Thri-Kreen are this vast Kreen civilization whose scouts have now arrived in the Tyr region. But mostly it is just a very detailed, not very exciting book about insane detail about the Thri-Kreen. And this is typical for the era, not just the meta plot, but the idea of heavily padded, banal splat books. This is not a wholly worthless book. I wouldn't go so far as that. I reviewed DS1 Freedom as an adventure and said that with some small caveats, it was bad. There were salvageable bits and there's some good ideas, but it was just bad. This doesn't get quite so bad, but it is very nearly, it's a poor product. It has some good stuff in it, but it is that all of this is captured within paragraphs and paragraphs of cultural detail that you will never use and isn't particularly interesting. And that where there is, I think there's a principle that cultural detail that is not being discovered via being in an adventure and finding diegetic ruins and so on, where you are, and I'm thinking so that the Stonehell adventures might have a page or two of history of Stonehell, so the DM knows the rough story, and so they can know the dynamics better, and also so they can, where it comes up, if it is relevant, because in Stonehell 2 it is, you may find out more about the history of the place, and that could be game relevant. The DM knows what to say. But generally speaking, culture, where it's effective as a bit of flavour, or history, where it's effective as a sense of this is the world you're in, needs to be condensed and usable. So it's not exposition. It's not simply you tell your players a bunch of stuff, or you as the DM read it. Of course, these books were sold heavily to people who, and this is maybe even more true of White Wolf at the time, which is outselling in 1995, is outselling AD&D. Vampire books were sold to people who didn't play Vampire, chiefly. And it's perhaps fair to suspect that by this point, the attempt here is to sell a book that is an interesting read for someone who is not actually going to play D&D very much, or may do. You get some of this even with Wizards of the Coast now, a recognition that people play very little D&D, but Wizards still want them to buy D&D books, because that's the gimmick, that's the game, that's the business. So let's go through this, the actual kind of the overview content reasonably efficiently. Psychological nature introduces, you have, by the way, plenty of italicized text from an explorer from the Crimson Savannah, like a Thri-Kreen who has come here and saying this is what I saw. You have actually a pretty reasonable picture here of how Thri-Kreen connects to each other and to other people. Clutches, which is those who they are either born with or adopt, and then the wider pack, which is a group of clutches. You've got lore of the clutch, you've got how leadership works, you've got the lore and lore, both types around hunting. You have lots of stuff, how they interact with other races, usually a couple of paragraphs in each. There's how do they relate to dwarves, gnolls and humans, how do they relate to elves, how do they relate to half giants, stuff about how they sleep or don't sleep, differences between the two subspecies in the Tyr region, including slight mechanical differences you are permitted to use. The Toxa have a third finger rather than a third top finger rather than only two at the top and one at the bottom. That could matter slightly mechanically. It's not wholly worthless, but at this point we are 30 pages in, and we've learnt about clutches, and we've learnt about physical differences because we're into physical nature. So we know they've got racial memory. They're into high loyalty to clutch and to pack, but so relatively speaking, their morality trends tribally. And we've learned some differences between subspecies. That's taken us 30 pages. We then have a table about stages of growth, which apparently matches itself. It matches itself here to levels, except that it says that by the time you're getting to the Wandering Age and Venerable Age, which are technically at 6 plus 3 HD and 6 HD respectively, you're at level 3 plus, except that's not the case, because 3+s I think start as young adults. That's mentioned elsewhere. It does have a cool thing about gaining racial abilities as you level. I think that's a legitimate mechanic to have it on that side as well as on the class side and whatever else. And I think it's fun. You know, they develop venom through which they can make, using their venom plus some sand, they can make crystal weapons, and that these crystal weapons are basically as good as metal. That's cool, but you have to level up to that. Yeah, so it's not clear where you do have mechanics. It's not wholly clear. You're actually told that a player character of a similar power to a adult Thri-Kreen can make venom, but here you're told you'd be at level 3 at 6 plus 3 HD rather than, so 2 age categories up in the final event. Yes, so that's bad. It's not been double checked for usability and play. That is not reassuring. Continuing quite fun John Dollar art. It's a leaping Thri-Kreen. I enjoyed the art, like I say. Rules about leap. These are all the racial things. Some stuff about Ranniker smoke and lung infection, chitin rot, diseases. This is actually quite useful. You know, most, apart from one subspecies which lives in the Crimson Savannah, most Thri-Kreen are vulnerable to humidity-related diseases, and they don't like a particular kind of plant smoke. So the latter is maybe less relevant. It's pretty specific, but the lung infection chitin rot thing is, you can imagine being semi-regularly important in a big exploring game. If they go to the Forest Ridge, the Ringing Mountains, places like that, or north toward the Last Sea. Their kiting can get damaged. That's cool. There's some new non-weapon proficiencies, such as their sign language and their reading writing for their syllabary, which is not for the Thri-Kreen in the kind of basic setting, but for the more settled nations in the Crimson Savannah. More weapons and types of weapon, like and subspecies of weapon, made of different things, metal and dazzle tchachkas and so on. A weapons list, because they've got a bunch of weapons. That's fun. I'm all for, but this is one of those things where I think if you enjoy that, this is the kind of splatty, bloaty stuff which the true AD&D player can enjoy, because if you enjoy the first edition dynamic of weapon to hit versus AC, and there's a million polearms, you get that. Second edition too, of course, has a long list of polearms with small differences. If you're into that, and I'm into that, then having more weapons isn't dangerous. It's not something which is going to break your game, and it's not something which takes much more headspace. There is a thing I find that, you know, your players need to know their stats, the abilities their weaponry has. That's a pretty classic thing, which is easier with a very small armory, but as soon as it gets more, players have to be more disciplined. But that's true with any higher rules load game. There's some stuff. I'm now at 57 pages. Some adjustments for spells and psionic adjustments. This is good. Thri-Kreen are different. It's hard to put them to sleep or charm them or anything. They can be repelled via repel insects. They can't be, but hold person, charm person don't work, but charm monster, hold monster would. They count as monsters for certain spells. Yeah, and certain kind of abilities, psionic abilities don't work, or they can't use, or it's just offensive. Pheromone discharge is considered highly offensive by most Thri-Kreen. That's fluff, but it's mechanical fluff that you can actually see being relevant, as in you can see your players using something, pheromone discharge, when talking to NPC Thri-Kreen. You can also set up NPCs doing the same to indicate their lack of understanding of who they're talking to or their desire to offend. Kind of set up the social dynamic so that players have to negotiate it. Thri-Kreen society, some of this has already come up. It's somewhat repetitious. You get stuff about what they do believe about the afterlife and the chain of reincarnation. Their non-religion, they kind of believe in elementals, who they are. When they're priests, they're trading really with them. They do remember or have a racial memory of the Great One, kind of ancient emperor, maybe an Evangion. It's not clear. Maybe the emperor was associated with a human Evangion. Evangions being these sort of half insectile, but that's not how they start. They start as whatever they are, but then they become half insectile agents of regeneration. Arcane Shadows, the third big metaplot adventure, which is okay. Probably better than Freedom, probably worse than Road to Uruk, which weirdly, I think, as I said at the time in the Freedom thing, is also by Zeb Cook, but is just a solid step up on Freedom. Arcane Shadows covers an Evangeon coming back, or someone becoming an Evangeon. It's probably more fun though, isn't it, in most of these cases for players to get to do stuff. Not always. Detailed examples of how trade is a page and a half, 3 columns. The idea here is presenting the way in which Thri-Kreen see trading as a hunt and as a game. And it's that's a fun idea. I don't mind being told something like that. But again, this is valuable page space. This is stuff you've paid for. This was $15 in 1995, £10. So you're talking for well, probably with paper inflation, 40 quid now, English. That or a bit more in dollars. So yeah, one has this problem with modern Wizards of the Coast adventures that and I mean, it's not as if it is not true in lots of products of this time as well, but where you're getting a 200-page book or something, or 240-page book or whatever they are, and you realise that though there's one chapter that's just amazing for efficiency, there's another, everything is overwritten. Room descriptions like half a page, most of a column. Box text is a quarter of a column. The monster stat setup for a particular set of things, because there's a stat box and there's a description, is most of a page, but it gives less information than in the old monstrous compendiums somehow. That's common in the experience of reading Wizards products, and this is one of the worst examples that I can think of in second edition or AD&D in general for this kind of endless bloat. Rather than giving a column on trade, including the perfectly reasonable example of how you'd introduce yourself formally and the way in which it works, there's a word count chasing thing here. Some interesting stuff about how the cities in which Thri-Kreen are more common. Some stuff about languages and sound. I mean, there's a thing about how they pronounce sounds, and you're like, fine, if you're going to have weird names, maybe you need to have a pronunciation guide, but maybe just avoid the weird names, or maybe learn to write more efficiently. Then we're at Pack and Nation, hunting packs, raiding packs. There's lots of and special kinds of packs, and there's some sample packs. There's stuff about how the particular, the diaspora in Ram and Uruk work, the knowledge-seeking special kind of super pack. Then we do get a small amount of stuff, and this is the great missed opportunity, I think. Given this is a book that constantly mentions stuff about the North, hasn't it? You get here as well, but gives you about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6-ish pages which detail stuff to do with the northern nations. The rest of it has functionally, because you also for subspecies you've only dealt with the 2 in the tier region, in the tablelands. You get 6 pages dealing with the social aspects of the Thri-Kreen, who live, including their kind of nation names and how they build their cities. That's kind of fun stuff, by the way, here. It's also surprisingly efficient. There's a little Kroon city from the Crimson Savannah. Isn't that nice? Made from like snail spit or something, from giant snails. And the structure of their nations. There's mention of a great empire further north in the Crimson Savannah, which is implicitly what's used in the adventure too. But the frustration, not that I want them to go from 6 pages to 30 pages for this, but that you've spent all that time, we're now into the 80s of pages, talking about mandible shapes and most of a page of a pronunciation guide to words that it just doesn't matter. Just pronounce them phonetically. And then we get stuff about, we're expanding the setting, but don't worry, you can read about that in the campaign setting, we're told at one point. And Monstrous Compendium 2, Terrors Beyond Tier, which is obviously meant to set up the world beyond tier, does. It's a weird one. I almost feel like talking about this one. It's very niche in terms of D&D interest, but in terms of there's loads of interesting monsters, but it's mostly not actually about Terrors Beyond Tier. I guess you have a few that you could use regularly beyond tier, but the main ones are the Thri-Kreen. And that's only a couple, and the Trin. The Trin are also detailed here. Here you have a colour illustration. That's fun. But yeah, two of the subspecies, Takichi and Tondi, and then the Jez and Joel, and then Thri-Kreen, that's the other two. Well, presumably, I mean, that's the thing. The other two who also live in the north, it's not necessarily well set out, but this does give you more detail about the Thri-Kreen. There is one, the original Thri-Kreen are in the Dark Sun campaign setting, original Monstrous Compendium. They are a genetically engineered special race. So you can go to these other places, but it's something where you think you get this, and this at this point feels like it's just selling you the revised setting. I don't even want to say that is the only thing that's going on. There's plenty of information here, and the adventure gets you involved in that stuff. But the adventure maybe more so also makes clear that there's a threat coming. This is a new meta plot thing, perhaps, that you've got the Thri-Kreen Empire, the Crimson Savannah Empire coming for you, or for the tier region. And at that level, it's just selling future books that largely didn't emerge. Revised campaign setting did, but other than that, I don't think anything else. I can be corrected, very happy to be, but I don't think anything else about the Thri-Kreen Empire came out. The remaining products were psionic artifacts, something about wizards, defilers and preservers, and then two other beyond tier books about other things altogether: Windrise of the Jagged Cliffs and Mine Lords of the Last Sea. But anyway, we do get a short thing on Kreen of Other Worlds as well, which is obviously how could you use some of this in other settings. This is the interoperability, you can use it for other games thing. Mostly relevant for Toril, for Forgotten Realms, because there always were Thri-Kreen on the Shah. But yes, this kind of stuff actually where it says they're unknown on Kryn, but if you want, and they don't have psionics if they are on Kryn, and maybe you can introduce them here. I actually find this kind of stuff frustrating because there's no authentic, fits the setting. Look, a DM can put anything they want into any setting they want, of course they can. But this is just a way to make someone think, oh, I play Dragonlance, maybe this is relevant. Thri-Kreen PCs, this is at least just, though it's still over long, it has class descriptions for how each class works. It talks about what kits they might take. It's okay. It gives you multi-class options, including Cleric Psionicist, which, as they point out, just for build strength, Cleric Psionicist for a Thri-Kreen who has 5 natural attacks, if they're just staying at natural, albeit at speed 6 if they count as large. But yeah, that's a potentially very powerful multi-class. The Cleric is cheap as well, obviously, to level. And the Psionicist could take Psychometabolism or something, could take something that's pretty good at buffing them. The kits, there are 6 kits, I think. The kits are maybe 6. There are 5 warrior, 1 psionicist, 1 something else. Yeah, the kits are mixed and not amazing. Kits are debatable. Look, not everyone likes kits. That's fine. Which one is overcomplicated, or perhaps, and I think this is actually less, despite what I'm about to say, but this is a less well-grounded criticism, which is that they break the power curve or they make players' PCs too tough. My experience of kits is not that on the whole, with caveats, but mostly because the most powerful kits are heavily specialised and do show significant downsides in meaningful play. Maybe the problem is they don't in story gameplay, but they do in meaningful play. An example, the Paladin Skyrider, you can get a free Griffin or Hippogriff at first level, but you know what, you get no benefits below the ground in terms of your kit gives you nothing extra there, and if your Griffin dies, you're basically out of the game for 6 months. In a meaningful campaign with time records and with a variety of play levels, there are real cost benefits on that, but of course maybe not in a classic early 90s onwards campaign. I don't know. So what I would say though is that the power curves have to be meaningful. As in, if you're playing a game, and D&D is first and foremost a game, the different things, the monsters need to be balanced. The player options need to be balanced, and by that I mean there has to be trade-offs for power. And there have to be costs and benefits to doing things. You take more time doing stuff, you make more noise doing stuff, you get wandering monster checks. Thieves level up quickly, but then at first level, they start with a middling set of abilities to get access to stuff. Okay, but not amazing. And middling, including to non-weapon proficiencies if you're using that. And have skills which are unique mostly. I mean, complications about the bard and the ranger, of course. But, they're uniquely the best at those things. They got all these points. But they will be bad at most of those abilities. And so they need to level to get the main thing they're good at. And backstab is so situational, So fair enough. That's the thief. The thief is cost and benefit. Elves are very powerful, but obviously they have both pluses and minuses to their stats, and like dwarves, like halflings, whatever, they cap out at a lower level cap, which in a meaningful campaign that takes, which covers many levels in gameplay, eventually that early advantage of the elf having all these racial abilities is evened out. And so the same with kits. Kits have to follow the same kind of principle of they take and they give. There are things you want them for, and then there are things you lose due to them. And these Kreen kits are not particularly well designed on that basis. The Tick, the Hunter, gets 2 bonus proficiencies, but 2 required proficiencies, and has no special benefits or hindrances. And equipment is generically, they only use Kreen weapons. They have to take Githka as a weapon proficiency, but they get Chachka for free at 5th level, but they can't take it beforehand. The Tick, the Guardian, who is another kind of normal member of the pack, but one who guards the young and the old at home, is weapon proficiencies only with Thri-Kreen. Non-weapons, they get 1 required, but no, and then one bonus. They get an AC bonus, and they cannot start with a proficiency in tracking, and they are often attacked first. So neither of those is particularly powerful in terms of the benefits. The costs are small, so I'm not here sniffing about the cost. The costs are you start with Kreen weapons. The Tick can't have tracking and may be targeted first because they're bigger. But here you're talking about tiny rises, tiny dips compared to the Skyrider. And I think part of the fun of kits is to, and I'm not saying that maybe I think it's fine to have different kinds of things. I think if people want to go for something much smaller in impact, that's reasonable. It leads to sometimes kits having literally no positive or useful effect. The Burglar has no explicit positive effect in Complete Thieves Handbook, whereas you look at some of the stuff in Wizards or Priests and they're much better kits if you're looking for something with strong benefit, strong cost. The Kalak, the Scout, 1 bonus proficiency, 2 required proficiencies. They Thri-Kreen equipment, and they may have a bonus to their alertness if they take it, and they have to have so they're cheaper survival. They are smaller by nature, which is usually helpful, and they don't lose stats due to that. Special hindrance, they have to have alignment restrictions like a ranger. The Kick, the Raider, no bonus proficiency, 2 required proficiencies, can use non-Kreen equipment, and they have some disadvantages, small statistical ones. This is just weaker than the other ones because there are no real upsides other than access to non-Kreen equipment. But given the others say, oh, well, unless they've had special contact, you think, well, every player is going to say, well, my character had special contact with non-Kreen. If that's the game, if it becomes about the advantage you're gaining from the kit, you want the kit to have very clear rules, very clear costs and benefits. And the Kick, the Raider, has basically virtually no meaningful benefits. The Pack Sound Assist, the Tech Chakak, 2 bonus proficiencies, 1 required proficiency. They have better contact. Their telepathic use of contact is much easier with smaller penalties than other Kreen. And they can have social disadvantages or be targeted first due to their special body art. So they are, if you're a Psionicist, that is just good, pretty much. And then finally, the Guild Tech Text, the Student Missionary, is a sort of wisdom-seeking, influenced by good Kreen from the north, from the Crimson Savannah. They get 2 bonus proficiencies. They have 1 required proficiency, and they can pick any equipment. They often wear jewelry. They are a member of an extended pack. and have therefore friends all over the place who are part of this extended knowledge-seeking group. And they have raiders don't like them. That's the only disadvantage. There's a +2 reaction penalty for Kreen raiders. I should say, both the student missionary and the raider can also keep starting gold that isn't spent. So that's another small advantage. So this is the classic kind of certain priest kits not being allowed to keep money. So you can see that there is the design curve there's a couple of quite minor ones. The tick and the tick-tick, the hunter and the guardian, the scout, the kalak, unfortunate name actually in Dark Sun. I think there's another thing where like a leader is called a kulak, which I feel like one of these is a sorcerer king, and one of these is a class of rural petty bourgeoisie annihilated by Stalin. Someone should check the dictionary on these things. But the Kalak has a couple more things going on. The raider's just bad. It's something you just always pick something else. If you're looking for something with costs and benefits, and if you're just looking for costs, well, why not role play them in? If it's just about that, this is part of the problem with this era. Is you get to the point where you have stuff that no one's actually using in game, and to the degree that people think the game is about something, it's about having role-playing experiences. That's the common writing feature. Classic for Vampire, obviously. It's what's different in 95, 96 onwards about first Birthright in general. Like, is Birthright very late 94? But Birthright says, look, there's even though it doesn't always support this play very well, it says, look, here's an open domain game with a war game involved as well. You can fight each other, and you've got resource management. And then Bruce Cardell arrives, and actually, and sometimes Monty Cook as well, but just writes adventures that are like, wow, here's a bunch of exciting things where player choice might matter, even if it's part of a bigger story, like the Ilithiad or the Sargon trilogy. The final thing, but the point is that everyone else is obsessed with this kind of like, well, have a role-playing experience. There's so much stuff about players might want to do this, or this is an experience they could have of role-playing a Thri-Kreen. Finally, the adventure, the taste of fear. This gives you the sign of there's a crack. This is actually on some maps you can get of Athas, including one I use for a pre-Pentad period, but a crack that takes you down to the Misty Border and then to the Crimson Savannah and beyond the hinterlands. So for rough geography, the tablelands and the tier region are over here. Then you've got the Ringing Mountains and the Forest Ridge. And then you have Dragon's Crown, which there is the first of the Dark Sun Epic adventures is set there. And then the Great Rift, and then you get out. The hinterlands is this area beyond the Ringing Mountains and the Forest Ridge. And you start on the inside of that in the generic campaign. The hinterlands are, though they're grassy and stuff, they are dangerous. They're not settled really. And they're not heavily detailed. There are a few things, I think, in the revised setting. But prior to that, more or less, you end up only knowing about the Dragon's Crown, which is a mysterious place beyond with, what turns out to have a bunch of some psionicists and some weird stuff going on, and you have to go there to sort out a problem that's affecting Athas. But now this is obviously expanding, and it's giving an official way out with this, what is a Thri-Kreen stronghold at the edge there. So here you get psionically signalled by a dying wise old Thri-Kreen that he needs help to get to where he's meant to. By his destiny, he's meant to go to die. A place that is mentioned in Dragon's Crown, actually, a kind of big statue head thing. But then that is interrupted and interfered with essentially by Kreen. They're Zictrin, by Kreen from the north, from the Empire, not from the civilized nice nations further south to the west, I guess, the northwest. But to the farther north, the Kreen Empire and the Kreen Emperor are preparing for an invasion. So there we go. You can see, by the way, here they're setting up, like I said, a future meta plot. The idea, I think, is okay, and there's some interesting things which indicate there's an understanding that adventures should have certain components, but it is basically not a good adventure. It's for 6th to 9th level. I actually think that's fun. I think it does create one problem I'll pick up to do with 9th level characters, but it certainly strikes me that it's desiring to. There's something good for mid to high level, early high level Dark Sun characters. You might have done some other stuff. It's really meant for Kreen characters. It does say, well, maybe you should attach some NPCs if no players play Kreen, or maybe, whatever. There's kind of a problem there that it's predilected on the idea that players play Kreen, and therefore the stakes matter, and therefore they can have racial memory of events, and they will care about this old Kreen. But basically, it's linear. It doesn't account for things players might do. It doesn't, though it technically has this. There are mentions of things like it will weigh this much. It will be worth. It might be worth this much, or this is the way water and food matter here. Like particularly, there's a giant insect introduced here, which comes up in the adventure, which provides that if killed or harvested, provides a bunch of food and water. So, and I mean that's something which points towards the survival element of Dark Sun. But much like other Dark Sun adventures, it mentions this stuff, whilst the actual adventure is just a bunch of plotted events where you're told more or less these need to happen like this, and characters go between. So the survival then is a shell game. The survival thing is the players being distracted to think they are playing a game when in fact they are observing a masquerade, Vampire the Masquerade. You get what I mean? Well, literally Giovanni Chronicle style. You're just seeing stuff happen. And here the players get to be more active than some of those very, very, very heavily scripted stories, and certainly more than in Freedom or maybe in Arcane Shadows either, as examples of other Dark Sun adventures. But the players are nonetheless bounded on what they're allowed to do. It does say that, if based on the timeline and the actions of the players, you don't need to force the pace of the adventure. If the party destroys the intruders without reaching the rift, the long-term result is a slowly increased number of encounters until local order sends the PCs back. Like there's more invasion and you have to find out more. So it says, look, it doesn't matter. This is good. That's a good attitude. But the general structure of the adventure and the general expectation of how the players play it is linear, closed, and doesn't really understand why you have things like encounters. It says, here's some optional encounters if you want some stuff for the players to do. Well, look, the players might want to do something between the things you force on them, so why not force some other stuff on them that isn't in the world, it's just stuff you've decided. So you might find some Anachor. You might find, if you're in Sandy Wastes. It's interesting, there is if you're in Badlands, Stony Barrens or Sandy Wastes, there is an idea that you might be in different terrain and random encounters are different based on that. That is represented fully in the pretty good, detailed, more detailed in fact than Monster Manual 2 from first edition, but in that style they're 1d20, 2d12, 1d10, 1d12 kind of tables, different things with subtables. These are good, but it's along those lines, but much less detailed. There's one encounter for each, and they're optional. There's no mechanic for triggering them, just DM fiat. You say you might fight something. I mean, the Anachors are less dangerous, I think it's fair to say. There's 6 of them at 3 HD with some decent abilities, but no decent combat abilities, but no psionics. The Garge in the Stony Barrens is very dangerous, albeit if you can get to grips with it, you can kill it. It's AC 2, 48 HP, Thaco 13, but only 1 attack. And the Silkworm can fly, HD 6. HP 30, Thaco 15. It's not super tough, but again, it's dangerous because of its movement. One thing, of course, is all these encounters, if the players need to fight something on the way to have fun, then do that. That's the idea. Then they meet Kachar, and he tells you a tale, and there's a lot of box text and people saying stuff, and you have to do the thing. Then an optional encounter, you might fight a giant the flying insect that is introduced in this module. Then you find as you get then you run into some Trin who are like primitive. They're like Neanderthal. They're described as like Neanderthal Thri-Kreen. That may be unfair to our Neanderthal cousins, but the idea of like these precursor Thri-Kreen, slightly stupid, but very dangerous. There's some Trin fighting there in that picture. And they just attack you, and then you get to this fallen head. I think there's a decent... it feels that there's some cartography by Diesel. It's a bit like late Dave Sutherland cartography, that like there's just some deterioration in basic ability to draw maps. Late Dave Sutherland cartography is genuinely hideous stuff. I've shown some of it in Birthright videos actually. In Heroes of the Giant Downs, I definitely did probably Legends of the Hero Kings too. That is the thing you come across, very Ozymandias. It is a statue commemorating, and you have a racial memory commemorating maybe this old emperor associated maybe with an Evangeon. There's a funeral. You're then told basically what's going to happen next is the foreign Kreen are going to turn up and desecrate this because they want to, because it's giving racial memories to people who the Empire is about to attack. I guess that's a reasonable reason. This is a sign. I mean, I've already said this linearity, the fakeness of the encounters. Do an encounter if you want the PCs to do it. You have to get on to the next thing. It does say, like, maybe ask the PCs how they would do a funeral for Chaksa when he dies. This is weird. Oh, Kachar, sorry. This is weird in a way, because though the idea that players contribute ideas is not bad, if it takes 2 minutes, it can be a nice thing that gives a sense, reminds you of the texture of the secondary world, of the fact that this is one you're invested in, that you have come to know about. Obviously, the idea you might spend, like, all the players giving an idea is very, I think, as I've seen someone describe it, a Princess Tea Party. You know, it's using D&D chiefly as a opportunity for improv rather than as a game, and there's a lot of this in this. It's sometimes you're just told to let them's the breaks, this is tough, they've got to make a hard decision. That's good design, but mostly this adventure does not feel like that. But yes, you are told that what happens is all the PCs need to have gone away to do a ritual hunt for the offering for Kachar's soul, and if they haven't, they're probably, unless they make a save versus death, they're just captured, and if they're not Kreen, they're then executed unless they're wizards. But there's all these Thri-Kreen, these foreign genetically engineered guys who come and attack. You have options. You're told you could attack outright, wait and observe the intruders, talk to the strangers. There are intentionally be captured. There are options, and that's fun, and I approve of that. There is an assumption there's a problem here that you could approach different ways. Now, there's still a degree to which what needs to happen is there needs to be a chase. Basically, Indy is not allowed to wreck the plane. The plane has to get away, and the plane in this case is a giant flying insect. You have to then get on with the next thing. Some stuff happens, and you have to chase after it and then fight it. It's quite dangerous, actually. The giant Jalithgak, which is a gigantic version of the big flying insects you've already seen. And then one way or the other, you may get to the rift. And it's good that Hein does say, oh, maybe they don't get to the rift, in which case different things happen. There is a contingency planning, and if an adventure is to slot into a world, there has to be a sense of what's going to happen next. It can't be, if it's completely closed, fine, but if it's going to slot into the world, what happens if the PCs succeed? What if they fail? What if they partially succeed? What if they partially fail? It does that, but ultimately you end up at the rift, and there's a lot of stuff to read, and then this is you actually continue to chase the Jalithgak if you haven't defeated them already. Then some more Trin attack, but the Trin attack the foreign Kreen, and you can aid on either side, but it's not particularly exciting. Basically, you should watch the battle and not help anyone, because then half of the remaining foreign Kreen are dead, and the remaining Trin, the kind of little savage guys, run away. So then it's easier to fight them. You then, at this stronghold, this gate being made from the giant snail slime, which is cool, over the Great Rift. It is held by a grand total of 6 foreign Kreen, because most of them are out doing stuff. And you can fight them, but then probably reinforcements arrive and chase you away, because you're not allowed to solve this problem yet. It's a sort of, it's edge of the map gated territory stuff, but it's super fake, because it's not like this is just the edge of the map, sorry. There's a certain honesty to saying to the players, this is where the game is. But a thing where you're saying, well, no, you can only go there when the plot allows you to, and the plot is not in your hands, it's in the DM's hands. You get some XP. You're told to give 10% bonuses for good role-playing of an insect mentality. Now, what this reminds me of is, of course, that Gary says in the 1E DMG you should rate players' performances based on, partly he uses the word as well, at various points role-playing, but what he means is doing that character's job well, being a fighter who fights, being a thief who thieves and uses thief skills. And who contributes to the party. And there may be some degree of also they represent a particular character in the milieu, but that's very much secondary, whereas here you're getting a bonus for exploring an insect mentality. 300 XP for each Thri-Kreen prisoner rescued, and 500 XP for each bag of glass shards from the Chaksa that is recovered, because you can't stop them vandalising this gigantic head. And any special tactic that defeats, solves, or completely bypasses an encounter gives full XP. So 2 of those, of course, are reflective of traditional XP mechanisms. The glass shards are gold for XP. Each bag is 500 XP, so 500 gold. And bypassing an encounter or solving an encounter can, and this goes all the way back to first edition and possibly before, but that you can get full XP for, well, partial XP for routing, or full XP or whatever for capturing or for negotiating. That's something it's mentioned, at points that there may be different ways to solve certain problems. You then get some stat blocks, including for 3 potential sample PCs with nice little John Dollar illustrations. I mean, there are a lot of Kreen, to be fair. Lots of things that look kind of the same. 2 racial memory handouts, which are boring box text, which that you're allowed to copy. You are allowed to photocopy them, but why you'd want to. And then you get 3 monsters: the Jalith Gak, quite big, dangerous flying insect; the Trin, the little savage guy; and the soldier version of the Thri-Kreen, the scout version being the Thri-Kreen that's in the first Monstrous Compendium. Anyway, all that to say, this is basically, I should say, the poster, because it gives some very basic information about all 6 subspecies of normal Kreen. It's almost almost an advantage, despite being a big poster with very little text on it. You're like, man, I've actually got 6 extra paragraphs about the stuff that I want to learn about, to do with the different Kreen and how they interact. This is not an absolutely awful product. I'm sounding more down on it than perhaps I am, in terms of, I think, yeah, I've got ideas from this. Yeah, I could even salvage some of that adventure. It is, if it is simply a map event, because there's different ways. You can either have full timetables for stuff. You can have stuff be so location based, it only triggers when the players are there. Or you can have stuff that's kind of just radiant map stuff, that things are likely to be happening when players turn up. You can do all of that without all of those things. I don't think any of those fully broke the secondary reality. The timetable obviously least so, but you can do that. But I think you can salvage that. It may well be better to, if you know that's an adventure that might be interesting eventually, or an idea that might be interesting eventually, to have Kachar, the elderly Thri-Kreen, know people beforehand. That's probably a better way to do that. And the weapons and the tactics and some of the kits and the idea of the subspecies, even though they're laid out badly, all of this is perfectly usable. The idea of, some of the description that takes 30 or 50 pages of their society, if that was down to 6 to 10 pages, 10 pages is quite a lot in that case, but if it's down to that much, then man, that could be really rich in terms of both presenting an NPC culture to the players, and also letting PCs, in terms of the degree to which, you are sometimes using these things to explore different moralities and ideas. I get that, it's part of that extra that even Gary has of, there's a space for silly voices. If you're doing that, then yeah, having a small amount of cultural stuff that helps with designing adventures, and that helps you know about the Kreen to the north, that helps you, present them convincingly to players, that's fine. It's just that it's also long. You're talking about 85 pages, 90 pages before the adventure, of which, what's the PC section, the official rules section, and this isn't the only rules, it's not very well organised, is 10 pages long. And then the other rules stuff, the combat and special abilities, is 20 pages long and is a bit overwritten. So really that's 30 pages out of 128 of PC rules, plus a couple of miscellaneous other bits. And 30 pages of an adventure, that should also tell you it's overwritten. I've described everything in the adventure. There's nothing else. It is a 9 encounter adventure or something like that, which takes 30 pages to describe. It's poor, even if the idea is salvageable. This is too representative of the worst parts of TSR D&D, I think, of second edition D&D particularly. It's interesting, I think, that Dark Sun actually may, along with Forgotten Realms, because there's so many products for that, but that means that there's also strong products in the midst of it. But I think Dark Sun suffers proportionally some of the worst for this out of everything in second edition. I'm not wholly sure why, other than that they adopted a meta plot early. But you do not find the same stuff. It's also, by this point, the mid-90s, you're talking about the dark days of the rebellion before things collapse enough that things change. And particularly that you get fewer writers, but of those writers, you have a couple of very, very good adventure writers. At this point, you've reached the most bloated, baroque and corrupt TSR products imaginable in a line which often suffers from an inability to take its mechanical theme, and its actual theme, but its mechanical theme too, which is this survival horror, and match it with actual writing and actual adventures. Other things, Birthright sometimes struggles with that, but not always. Spelljammer never quite fulfills its potential, though by the time you get to Astromindi Cluster, it's beginning to. Dark Sun basically never really gets there, and this is not unrepresentative of that. It doesn't make it. It's one of my favourite settings. I run there's now I've done 16 sessions online of a campaign, and I've previously run a full Dark Sun campaign. I love the setting, but you will run into this stuff. I actually think by the time you get to the very last couple of Dark Sun products, and maybe I just don't have physical copies of these, and I don't like reviewing classic stuff on PDF. I know this eccentric perhaps, but Mind Lords, Wind Riders, and indeed I should say within its category, Psionic Artifacts, for good and for bad. I just say, like the fact you can have a whole thing described on 2 pages that has loads of rules and is very interesting, is much more efficient than most of these other products. The last couple of products in the new livery just tend to be a little more focused, even though they're as long. I don't know why that is, but there we are. Anyway, if you have read or used Thri-Kreen of Athas or other Dark Sun products, I'd love to know what you think in the comments. And I may get another Dark Sun review in the next month or so, just catching up on stuff I plan to do. I might do City by the Silt Sea by Shane Lacey Hensley of Deadlands. Yeah, tell me if what other Dark Sun products you'd like to see discussed, and I will see you next time.